Good afternoon. I'm Luke Powery, the Dean of Duke Chapel, and on behalf of our entire chapel staff, welcome to the great towering church, Duke University Chapel. Today's conversation is a part of our Bridge Panel series, which are usually on a variety of topics. But through that series, we try to connect people from different walks of life, different disciplines, to discover shared pathways toward the beloved community of God. And as you know, today's topic is the role of faith at a research university. Today we are looking back in order to move forward. In creating what is now Duke University, James B. Duke wrote in his Indenture of Trust almost 90 years ago, "I advise that the courses of this institution be arranged with special reference to the training of preachers, teachers, lawyers, and physicians, because these are most in the public eye and by precept and example can do most to uplift mankind." More recently, the university's Board of Trustees revised the aims of Duke University, and I quote, "The university is committed to creating a rigorous scholarly community characterized by generous hospitality towards diverse religious and cultural traditions. The university, therefore, pursues the following aims: to foster a lively relationship between knowledge and faith, to advance learning in all lines of truth, to defend scholarship against all false notions and ideals, to develop a love of freedom and truth, to promote a respectful spirit of dialogue and understanding, to discourage all partisan and sectarian strife, and to further the advancement of knowledge and service to society." So in our time here today, we have the opportunity to explore various ways faith contributes to the life and purposes of a research university, inside and outside of the classroom, whether it be in the fields of business, divinity, medicine, the arts and sciences, or public policy. Thinking about faith and practicing faith are alive and well at Duke University. Today is one example. Immediately after our conversation, there is a 2 p.m. event in the library about the media portrayal of Islam and Muslims. And then later today, even at the Sanford School, there will be the distinguished Terry Sanford lecture by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence. And so we invite you to spend your entire day engaging in the conversation, bridging faith and learning. And so I'm grateful to Professor Don Taylor for agreeing to moderate this panel, which is what I normally do. But Don is a professor in the Sanford School of Public Policy and the chair-elect of the Academic Council here at Duke. And so I'll turn it over to Don to get us started and to introduce the other panelists. Let's welcome Don Taylor.
So thank you, Luke. It's nice to be here with you today. Just a few, not ground rules, just logistics. Andy and Rachel have cards. You guys, if you have questions, we're going to hear from our distinguished panel. We have 4 of the deans of Duke, so this is a great panel. But if you have questions, we ask that you would write them down, and they'll be sorted forth. And by around 10 past 1 or so, we'll be engaging with the audience. So we look forward to doing that, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be here. So I'll just introduce just very briefly these 4 distinguished deans. As Luke said, Luke Powery, Dean of Duke Chapel. We have Bill Bolding, Dean of the Fuqua School of Business. We have Valerie Ashby, the Dean of the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences, and I believe you have a Vice Provost of Undergraduate? No, you don't. So, oh, I'm sorry, I was trying to give her another title. So you see the chair of the academic council trying to reorg things already. That will fail for sure. And then Mary Klopman, who will become the dean of the Duke School of Medicine on, is it July 1? So congratulations. Congratulations. I'm going to start with a big, huge, massive question that has three parts, and I'm going to give it to Valerie first, and we're going to ask the panelists to pick a part of the question to answer, and we'll see where things are going, and I may have a few follow-ups, and they may follow up with one another, and then eventually we'll get to your questions, which we really look forward to. So the big question is, what is the role of faith in a research university, in your school that you're the dean of, in your job specifically as dean, and in your life? So Valerie, if we would just give that to you first to pick a part of that to address.
So I will answer the first part about our school first. So I am Dean of Trinity College of Arts and Sciences. And in our school, it's pretty straightforward actually in my mind, because we are trying to deliver a world-class liberal arts education to our students in this research environment. That's our goal. As such, we are humanists, we are social scientists, and we are natural scientists. And the way that we think about this education, and it doesn't matter what your field is, and I'll just pick on chemistry since I'm a chemist, whatever I am trying to accomplish, to deliver, to create, whatever problem I'm trying to solve, typically involves human beings. And so when you consider that, you are actually trying to not just come up with a product, but you're actually trying to impact human behavior or improve some part of the human experience, then one has to think broadly about your field. So you have to think, if I was trying to deliver a new medical something, I have to think about, well, what's the culture of this group of people? What's their environment? What's their language? What's their religious, direction? What's their faith? That matters in translating anything. It's a full humanistic approach. And so that's why we insist upon a broad liberal arts education. It doesn't matter what you're trying to accomplish. And for us, we also go with the mantra that our dear president has put forward: knowledge and service to society. And you cannot be of service to people, to human beings, if you don't understand the breadth, the fullness of their lives, and faith is a huge part of that. In addition to that, when I think about faith, there's a hope that comes in faith. And there's this sense of things can be better. What are we trying to instill in our students? It is this sense of a self-examination, a re-examination. Why do they come to the university? They need to reimagine, rethink, open up, imagine who they could be. That's faith-like to me. It's hope-like to me. It's open-ended. It's that examination of how they might reimagine themselves and how they might reimagine this world that we live in. So it underpins several of the aspects of a liberal arts education, and I'll just end by saying there's some qualities that we actually want in our students, and listening to that mission that was read, I think Luke read it, there are qualities that we're actually trying to instill in our students that include empathy and respect and listening and humility. And those are similar kinds of values, if you will, that you might find in various faiths, whatever that is. And so we don't see research or education or what we're trying to deliver as being at odds at all with any version of faith. It's actually the underpinning of what we're trying to accomplish and rooted in what we're trying to accomplish. So.
Mary?
So yeah, I can expand a little bit on the role in my job as both a physician, but also a person responsible for training physicians. That clearly, although we teach and practice what we think is evidence-based medicine, that is as much truth and as much evidence as we have to inform us on clinical decisions. That's the easy part of training doctors. The more challenging part is really training them to respect and understand diversity, because that's very much a part of delivering care. and particularly diversity in faith, because we know that patients come to us with very, very different backgrounds, culturally as well as informed by their faith. So part of our training is not to really drive home a faith, but an understanding of what constitutes a patient, a person that we're treating, and really understanding them in all aspects of their life. Now, some patients are very comfortable sharing their faith. Certainly at moments of crisis in patients' lives, that really comes into play. We deal in times where people are really having to take their faith and apply it to decisions of life and death, end-of-life decisions. So training doctors to understand that is part of our training, and probably the most challenging part. I come to the table as a Catholic. That is my background. There's no question that influences the way I approach patients, and I always put the patient's background in the context of what I understand. And I know that every physician comes to the table with a different view, but really being able to step away and listen to that person in front of us, that's part of our training, it's part of our practice. So it very much plays a part of how we train docs and how we practice.
Bill?
Okay, so I'll start with where you stopped, which is the personal role that faith has in your life. I was raised a Quaker, and that's a fairly poorly known religion, so I'll spend just a minute explaining what I think that means. So what that means to me, in terms of my faith, is that there's a light in everyone, and so that we should be looking for that light in all that we encounter, and that we should look for the best in everyone. At the same time, there are very strong values associated with Quakerism, which say you have a responsibility. If that light is being diminished or extinguished by circumstances, then we have a responsibility to stand up for those who are not able to have their light shine. And so maybe the best known expression which you would be familiar with is speak truth to power. Turns out that people use that expression all the time. It dates back to the 1700s and the Society of Friends. And what speaking truth to power means, what truth is, the truth, according to Quakers, is that that love always wins, basically, and that hate destroys. And so that as you approach people in this position, it has an implication in terms of you don't use power yourself to eradicate wrongs that may exist. You use approach of trying to find the best in even those who you view to be your enemies, and that you always engage that there is no such thing as irreconcilable differences. And there is this very, very painful thing for any of you who have experienced Quakers, which is the idea of consensus. And that we will slowly get to where we need to be by all seeing the same truth. And so as I was coming over here, my faculty dean said, well, good luck with what you're about to do. And she gave me a little comment, which was, whenever someone finds you puzzling, I just tell them you're a Quaker. And that explains everything. And so what does that mean then in terms of how I do my job, which is I really believe in the idea that we look for the best in everyone, and we use this process of consensus, and that we therefore have to have patience as we move forward. To quickly articulate what that means in terms of the overall school and the university, from the point of view of the school, for me it's more of a values proposition, which is to say that each of us should be looking for the best in one another and figuring out how it is we work together to accomplish something with common purpose, and by unlocking the potential that everyone has, we can do amazing things together. And so we're trying to build insights and leaders that are consistent with that values proposition. And when it comes to the university as a whole, then I would use the more traditional view of what speaking truth to power is about, which is effectively, my view is universities have this remarkable responsibility to search for truth and to move forward with that truth even when it's inconvenient or even when there are people in power who are in opposition to that truth. And so I feel like we play a special role in society to shine a light on issues which may otherwise be covered up.
Luke?
Okay. Faith, in my particular role here as Dean of the University Chapel and also a professor at the Divinity School, in many ways, the question of the institution or the school organization, my role as Dean, and also personally, faith is the bridge that links all of them. I mean, in many ways, my role here at the university is, I get paid to pray in many ways. I'm function as the religious figurehead at the university, and in many ways, a part of my role, implicit in the role, is the opportunity to foreground faith, whether it's my own out of the Christian tradition, or to support, as I also have oversight over religious life at Duke, which is beyond the Christian tradition and other faith traditions, right? To accentuate even the historic motto, Eruditatio et Religio, of the university, which we say is at the heart of the chapel's mission of bridging faith and learning. And so in many ways, to live on this campus, which is a major research university, and to highlight faith traditions or the role that faith may play in the life of faculty, students, and staff, in the hope for a more holistic education, to tag on to what Valerie said about the human being, to think of what it means to be whole, and faith is a part of that. So at the university level, in the terms of the chapel, we bridge faith and learning. It's a faith-based organization. So it's at the heart of what we do. On the Divinity School side, one could say that the subject and the object is faith. What propels many students, what propels me to, I teach preaching classes, is the faith commitments. But also one could say the object of study is faith. And what I mean by that, theology, church history, variety of religious traditions, practices of ministry. The Divinity School itself is a confessional organization still connected deeply to the United Methodist Church. And so faith obviously is deeply connected there. And so for me, as a person of faith, as a Christian preacher, I'm a preacher. It is very much a part, it's what propels me as a person forward to give me purpose and to hopefully convey a sense of hope for those to whom I may speak or lead or guide, regardless of their faiths, right? High church, low church, and no church, and to be of service, deeply committed to Jesus. Coming out of a tradition, the spiritual tradition, and I mean the spirituals, the music of the enslaved Africans in the Americas, this idea of what has been called the narcotic doctrine, which is from a spiritual, you can have this old world, but give me Jesus. Very much a part of my framework is coming through that particular lens of service to everyone we encounter in a religiously diverse, as Mary points out, context at a university, but to foreground faith as important to many of the constituencies here at the university, whether it's faculty, administrators, staff, students, and to value that, particularly in our day and age where religion can be the source, used as the source of violence, but also knowing historically and in the present day, religion and religious practice can be the source of good and hope and life. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. I wonder if I gave a basic definition of faith, maybe the simplest definition I can come up with as trust or confidence in someone or something. I wonder if I could ask you to think about, are there systems of faith at work in the Research University or at Duke that are well beyond the bounds of religious traditions? I think all of you very rightly began there, but I'm wondering, what are the systems of faith that we have constructed here at Duke that may be in the wide open but not called out as faith?
Well, you know, we are a research-intensive scientific institution. We have faith in that process, that there is a scientific process that helps us find truth. We believe in that as a method. We have structure and ways that we approach science because we really do believe that that will continue to lead us to ultimately a best therapy or an understanding of a disease. That's a construct that is built into the very fundamental sort of mission of at least our School of Medicine and the university, which is there is truth through research, and you follow pathways to get there.
And sometimes in the culture we might think of faith or faiths as sources of division, but that's an example of bringing people from many different faiths or perhaps the absence of a religious faith together in something.
Yep. No, absolutely, and it's actually a unifying theme universally with scientists. We believe in a basic process, and there is a real foundation to that process. It's not a leap of faith, but it is a real belief in you can define an experiment, and if you do it properly, you will get a result that can be repeated, and that is a basic construct.
And raises 15 more questions.
Go to them.
No, this is good.
Yeah, and
Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to write the next grant, yeah?
Yeah, we have to believe
exactly,
it, right?
exactly. So there's an optimism about that. It's the way that we approach, and I would just piggyback on that and say that it goes beyond the sciences. It's just research. We're actually, you know, when I think about my faculty, I love them because these guys are creating knowledge. That's amazing. And it doesn't matter if it's in the humanities or in the social sciences. Obviously, we think about the scientific method more, you know, in the natural sciences. But the team-based approach to doing that is also a bringing together of very different disciplines where you don't have to be an expert in either one of them to have a conversation. But we believe that when we put these people together, the outcome is better than the separate individuals, and we believe we will actually make progress. And we follow some set of scholarly rules around that to move forward the discipline, whether it is, you know, in classics, humanities, it doesn't matter. So that's just pervasive.
So I'm going to emphasize what Mary and Valerie have said, which is there is this faith in a system, and whatever kind of research you're doing, there's a belief that there's a process that has to be protected. I like to say this often, which is that I think it was a quote from Moynihan, which was, we're all entitled to our own opinions, but not our own facts. And that's the basis for a research university, which is we shouldn't be making up facts. Now, the problem is this is a challenge for a research university and can put us in conflict with other faith-based systems, which is research gets challenged if you have a faith-based system, say a political faith, and you start with a certain answer that you want, and when the science disputes that answer, then you can simply say the science must be bad or must be wrong. Sometimes the faith may be a religious faith, that you want a certain answer based on your faith, and therefore you would, again, dismiss the science. And so we have to be aware of the tensions that may exist around certain solutions that people may prefer based on a variety of faith systems, which then lead us into conflict. And our responsibility is to figure out how do we get beyond that conflict. And so we have people doing research around why do we have those kinds of conflicts? So some work done by our faculty around solution aversion. The reason we start to throw out science is we don't like the answers. You know, if we started with these are the problems, then maybe we would share the belief in science. So we have to be very sensitive to the role of multiple faith systems operating at the same time, overlaid on top of what I think is indisputably a faith system that undergirds a research university.
I mean, I think connected to all of that is even sort of beyond the research is connected to that phrase, knowledge and service to society. So underneath that is there's a sense of faith in ourselves, in that our research or our physical strength, intellectual strength, spiritual strength somehow can make a difference in the world. Right? All of the initiatives and civic engagement here at the university, even the initiative Doing Good in the Neighborhood out of the Durham and Duke Regional Affairs Office, right? There is a sense that somehow our commitments or our action or our around the Bass connections, right? So trying to solve a problem that we believe that we can make a difference somehow. And we're propelled forward because of that. We believe that somehow our energies, intellectual energies or spiritual energies, can work towards a common good. And I think that underlies much of what we see here. We can win, like as you were pointing to the Duke basketball team, even though it didn't go so well this year in the tournament, but this idea that we can be the best, right? And whether that's to work on a project on water in the School of Environment or working with the homeless in Durham, there's a deep commitment of faith in ourselves that I see at play.
Valerie?
Yeah, so I wanted to also revisit the sense of reconciling or the need, or whether there is even a need to reconcile faith and research. And so now I'll talk personally. I'll go back to the first. So my father's a Methodist minister, so you should know that. That's where I come from. So being in this place is pure comfort to me.
It's home.
It's home to me. This is where I lived more than any other place. And I'm a scientist. And so I get the question often, how do you reconcile that? The answer is there's no need for me, because faith does not equal understanding in facts. It doesn't have to add up to me. Faith is I believe it. Research is a completely different world over here for me. And sometimes those things add up and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, I'm fine with that, because that's actually a good answer for me, because if I could actually reconcile everything on paper, then I don't need faith. So faith is the space in between where my understanding starts and where, what I'm seeing begins on the other side. No problem. There's no need. I don't need to reconcile that. That actually feels good that I cannot. So to some degree, there is the reconciliation because we're doing research. Now the facts have to add up, right? But when you try to overlay my faith on top of that, no problem.
So it's not a fencing, it's a coexistence of the two, yes.
And it's beautiful to me so the science that I do, I synthesize materials, plastics kinds of materials. And every time my ability to recreate what is in nature, wherever there's a gap, that's where my faith is. And I love that. Every time I find it, my students are like, why can we only do 99.9%? Because.
I mean, there's an ancient saying within the sort of theological world, right, that goes back years, centuries. Faith or theology is faith seeking understanding. So even in doing your research, the answers may not come back in the way that you thought they would, or there might be different answers, but it's the seeking that is significant. Seeking understanding. Perhaps you may not understand, but you have to be okay that things don't match up in the way that you perhaps thought. But it's the seeking that is significant, particularly, I think, at a university. It's the ongoing search for truth and knowledge and whatever from a variety of perspectives, but it's the seeking that becomes significant, even if we don't always understand.
Yeah. Please, Mary.
But, you know, when you think of a university like Duke, it is one of the places where diversity of faith enriches the learning environment so much. And sometimes we take that for granted because it is very, very much a part of our culture. But it's absolutely necessary to our learning, and particularly in medicine, very necessary to our ability to practice. But it's a special environment to have a university where what makes us great is that we have diversity of faith. We celebrate it, we recognize it, we study it, we teach it. You know, and sometimes in a kind of the cocoon that we live in, we take that for granted a bit.
So I wonder, Mary, do you mean it's specific to Duke because we're in this place and this place is in the heart of the campus and the reasons that the university was originally founded? Is that what you mean by that?
And because we attract and try to make sure in all of our admission processes and our residencies that we really enrich the environment with a diverse set of learners that bring their faith to our school or to our environment. And as you read in the original doctrines about Duke, it was, despite being a Methodist base, it was really a university created to celebrate diversity. And that is diversity of faith, which I think is a wonderful aspect. And it is, you know, not inherent in every university.
So Valerie, I hope this doesn't put you on the spot, but you've worked recently at a public research university and now a private one with this, you know, this history. How are they different?
We don't have a Luke. We didn't have a Luke. It's shockingly different and beautiful in all of those ways. I mean, so, you know, just from sitting in my office.
Actually, they do have a Luke now, I think. But.
Yeah. Well, do
Be
they?
in the basketball team.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, right.
I got it.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, when I sit in my office, to Mary's point, I look out of the door, out of my window at this. And if I step out of my office and turn right, I walk into the School of Medicine. The same number of steps to the chapel in the School of Medicine. That's
When I'm walking
significant.
from Duke North to Duke South, there are two hospitals. I can see the chapel. I turn right.
It's ever present that this is here for all versions of whatever this means to you, but it's here. It's really present. In our welcoming of students, we do it in here. This is the first official event that students have is in this space. That is saying something to them about who we are as a university, and yet we're able to do it in this space, which is primarily one specific faith. I mean, and yet we welcome everyone in this space. And Luke prays. That never happens in a public, right? Because we just don't do that. So the traditions of this, when we say we are delivering a broad liberal arts education, we are not kidding. In the broadest sense of that word around faith, it's really strong. And the freedom to actually walk in that here is very different than in a public.
I know when I was on ECAC several years ago, President Broadhead was talking with us about some of the changes that actually were made that Luke read early on. And he talked in a way that is very obvious once I'd heard him say it, but it wasn't so obvious to me before that this chapel is many things at the same time. It is a Christian congregation. It's the center of religious life, meaning for many faiths that Christian, but also all other faiths, but it's also the symbol of the university. So if you go and look at any rankings of Duke, almost inevitably the picture will be of the beautiful chapel. So it's maybe from afar it looks to be a conflict, but I've now been here long enough that there's I guess I would call it a healthy tension that's just part of the essence of the place. I wonder, are there questions that you?
The cards are coming.
So got a couple here. Any other comments you guys feel need to
So,
make before?
I'm sitting here and I'm kind of feeling sorry for myself because from the business school you can't see the chapel.
We love you. We
Yeah,
really
but I did want to make note of that there are other. It's not just the chapel, but there are other tangible aspects even for a school that's a little bit away from here that are symbolic representations of the underlying substance of your statement that we welcome religious diversity. So if you come over to the business school building, you'll see a hallway full of flags that represent the identities of our students. And these flags, you think about flags, you think about countries usually. But we made a decision a number of years ago to say, why don't we put up flags that represent the identities in ways that are meaningful in the lives of our students? And so in addition to having the country flags, we started putting up religious flags. And so it's a very tangible piece of evidence that we welcome people who have important faith that is a part of who they are, and so that we can all recognize that.
So here, these are all really good questions. Let me start with this one. Do you think there is any place in the 21st century for a uniquely Christian research university as opposed to just a university of faith writ large? By uniquely Christian, I don't necessarily mean exclusively, but something more than a place that has a historical tradition.
Just something a little personal. My whole family went to Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a Catholic university and a good example of a Catholic university that has very, very strong research base. That being said, there's certain areas of research that they do not pursue because it's in direct conflict with some of the Catholic doctrines. But it also has a very, very strong focus on finding the truth. So you can build off of, in this case, a Catholic religion and build a strong foundation. But there's always going to be interesting limitations that can't generally do not create conflict with whatever religion. My husband he's the dean at Baylor School of Medicine, and they had to break away from their founding Baylor University because of some of those limitations. So sometimes it does create conflict, depending on how restrictive that interaction between the faith and what you want to pursue as a university. So I think there are good examples where it works, but there are some examples where it doesn't work.
This one, solutions to a problem assume some description of what better things look like the universe of the possible. Is this a domain of faith institutions, research institutions, or are those in conflict with one another?
I think the vision for a better world is really in the domain of humanity. And so it's the faith-based organizations or university, I wouldn't pit those against one another, but it's everyone's desire, hopefully, a calling, however you want to put it, mission to contribute to society, whether one is, regardless of whatever the faith tradition might be or not, that it really is a part of what it means to be a human.
The panel has discussed the importance of students having a broad liberal arts education that recognizes the wholeness of people as human beings. However, many undergraduate students graduate from Duke without basic religious literacy. Is there any consideration of including a religious/ethical component in a new curriculum? How about for professionals? So they've asked for undergrads, and how about for professional schools?
So I can do the easy one, which is in the business school, it would probably be surprising if we gave religious instruction, but in terms of ethical instruction, that's foundational for our programs and critical to have that be a part of our programs.
So it's a little different in Trinity because we actually have a Department of Religious Studies that's in Trinity that is not a part of divinity, and it's the breadth of religious studies. So it's, you know, it's no particular faith, it's religious studies. So that's a possibility for a major, a minor, all sorts of engagement with those scholars from that level, but I think that the question is not actually at that level. I think the question is asking something that's more faith-like. The ethics is something that's a part of every single engagement that we have with our students. As we want each one of our students to have a significant scholarly research experience. There are ethics discussions always in that, no matter what the field is. So that is definitely happening, but I still think the question is going to something different than that, even more different than that. And so if the question is, are we ever going to require some kind of religious study? The answer is no, at least not in the new curriculum that is presently being proposed by our faculty. And I also say that I was just having this discussion with our person who is the Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, that there are some values of the university, there are some values that come out of a liberal arts education, and there are some personal attributes that make up a whole human that we want to foster here as a part of their liberal arts education. And we don't teach that. And they are picking these things up in their mentoring and their research teams, in certain courses. That, as I go back to that sense of empathy, humility, sense of social justice and responsibility for other human beings who are maybe not as privileged to have had this experience. We want that in our students. But we are not at the moment going to have like a religious studies course in particular to get that. I'm not sure that would actually get us there.
I mean, historically, I don't know the dates around this, but the historians in the crowd would know better. There was a religion requirement, you know, for every undergrad, but that was a different day. But I would say that religious literacy in general, whether you gain that through a particular course or in some other way in the co-curriculum, that having a basic understanding of other religious traditions is critical to being a global citizen in the world. And so having a sense of just basic understanding would be helpful. You may pick that up in different ways and different offerings, but
I think Mary's going to jump in, but just to say that in the co-curricular piece, this is really where I think Duke also excels. The breadth of religious life organizations here at Duke is amazing. And what we often find is that students are not just in those because it's theirs, but because they want to learn something about a different one. But the opportunities are there to do that. It's just a broad range of religious life studies that are outside of the curriculum.
Well, obviously, ethics is the underpinning of medicine, but it's not a single faith-based initiative. We actually go through an interesting review process for admissions, which is at Duke, the applicants are given 4 or 5 scenarios, and usually they're ethical dilemmas. And so we really explore how ready they are to work through these kind of real-life scenarios, and that's very important as part of how they're going to approach the delivery of medicine, but it's not a single faith-based construct. It's really the ethics of medicine.
For what it's worth, when I was an undergrad, I stumbled into a course called History of Islam, and I have no idea why I took this course. It probably fits some box. But I remember when, in the last 15, 20 years, as our world has confronted Islam, where in the 1980s, other than that class, I don't know that I ever, it just was not a topic for me. But just knowing that there's Sunni and Shia, I mean, it's a big head start on trying to understand. So you could imagine religious instruction, but you could also imagine just a global citizen notion of needing to understand more about, religious traditions. This is an interesting question, to what extent is this question we're discussing today, what is the role of faith in a research university, an ongoing conversation at the school or the departmental level? Is this just an event that we're having here, or is this a conversation that is being had by the faculty?
You can't help but have that conversation these days. I mean, it's very much a part of the life that we live in, is really understanding diversity in the context of religion. And so in that sense, yeah, we're talking about it a lot, but again, it's understanding as opposed to a single faith. Obviously, the residents that we attract come from very different backgrounds, and a lot of their education comes from each other. And that's daily. It's exchanging, but that's why I think it's such a rich environment, because we do attract students from all faiths, from all cultures, and we don't actually have to have formal courses in it. They learn from each other.
This one's interesting to me, Mary, because I study palliative care. This one says, in terms of how faith it impacts our medical research and teaching and delivery, what's the role between cure versus care?
As I said, teaching evidence-based medicine is pretty easy, but teaching the humanistic side of medicine is really tough. And palliative care obviously creates some conflict with people's, particularly their religious beliefs, when it comes to making end-of-life decisions. And as physicians and as training physicians, we try to train them to listen. We don't assume. We don't assume that we have a construct that's going to work for a person or a family sitting in front of us. But it's part of training to understand how to listen and how to understand the perspective of that patient's family in terms of making decisions that go way beyond our evidence and the data that we know. And that's really, all the other aspects of care. And it's very important, but it's largely driven by this relationship with a patient. It's not driven as a we know and we do. So it's more the art of listening and what I call shared decision-making around particularly end-of-life decisions.
And so the teaching students to consider their faith, tradition, if any, and also the patients, that's a part of training these days.
Oh, no, absolutely. But we're more teaching them not to bring their faith too much into that discussion, because it's really about the patient and their family, and that's very difficult because we do enter the room with the background that we all come from. But I would say the hardest thing to teach is listening.
might what any of you have said today be different if you were not tenured?
Oh, I can answer. I'll
Doesn't
go
mean
first.
anything in medicine, but
That's back, right, right. It matters not.
So explain when you say it doesn't matter in medicine.
well, you know, in medicine, it's an honor, but it has nothing to do with how you support yourself, because our clinicians practice medicine, and that's how they support themselves. And they like the honor of being tenured, but it doesn't really influence how comfortable they are in being able to express their thoughts and make decisions. It's a very different construct in the clinical practices, because it's not as much a financial relationship with a university as it might be on the undergraduate, but I suspect it probably doesn't influence.
Not at all.
Yeah, no,
Not at
it's a complete non-factor, although I probably would not have been invited
Right.
if I weren't in a more senior position.
It's never, I think regardless of tenure or non-tenure, you know, it's always a good time to tell the truth.
I think what the question is asking or implying is, you know, if there is this goal to get tenure, is there a feeling among non-tenured faculty that they are not able to broadly voice their opinions? And again, I would say not at a university like Duke. That it is a very open environment to express your opinions, and I can't think of where it might have influenced a tenure decision, but
I'm actually skeptical of these answers. I'll just answer for myself. We definitely wouldn't have been invited if we were assistant professors. There's no doubt about that.
That's not true.
oh, that's not true. In many forums, we want the diversity of age, the diversity of where you are professionally in terms of these kinds of, at least in the medical school, we have lots of these kinds of discussions where we actually make sure we have assistant, associate, full professors.
Okay. My mentor would have killed me if I would have given time to thinking about something like this before I had tenure, because he would have said, you better not be doing anything but writing papers. And so that's not exactly the question you asked. And then I think I
Even
would.
a half hour, an hour?
Well, the problem is, I
If you
thought
started to
about
go off
it
on a
some.
tangent, maybe.
Yeah, I don't. And I think sometimes I give junior not about necessarily faith in general, but we can. The Sanford School does a lot of business by committee of the whole, and it means we end up getting mad at each other a lot. And so I usually tell the junior faculty, keep your head down, regardless of the topic. But maybe it's just me. This is an interesting one. So they're all interesting ones. Students are often encouraged to explore religious identity during their college years. To what extent does this desire to explore religious identity remain as a faculty member or administrator who's more senior?
So, at some level, I think the answer to that is very personal. At another level, it can be professional. So I said something earlier, which I've been regretting, which is, wouldn't it be surprising if a business school was offering religious instruction? And in fact, we do offer not instruction in religion, but we offer courses that explain the world we live in, and one lens to look at that world is through religion. And so, for example, if you're going to be doing business in Islamic countries, the rules of engagement are quite different than if you're in a capitalist country. And so that means, as the world is changing, depending on your environment, that maybe you as an individual administrator or leader have a responsibility for the sensitivity to the world, and therefore for the particular development that you as an individual need to have a richer perspective, and therefore create conversations about how you might change your curriculum and your developmental experience for others in your community.
I'll give a personal answer for myself about this. I grew up going to church all the time and felt that it was a tool of control by my parents of me, and so actively disbelieved. And actually, I became a Christian when I went to college, so it was really weird. I went to the secular thing, and that's where I became a Christian. So anyway, maybe that's an odd thing, but it's what happened. And as I was early in my faith walk, I spent a lot of time as I was thinking about becoming a professor trying to imagine what did it mean to try to do my scholarship as a Christian. The older I've gotten, which both means more experience as a Christian and as a scholar, I've come to understand, especially as I've gotten more power, it's really, when I think about a person of faith, it's how do I treat people? And especially, how do I treat people that don't have as much power as me? So that's not exactly, I don't think that's thinking of changing my faith, but it's having a different understanding of where I better be looking for my blind spots, so to speak. That's just a personal story or answer.
I'll just say something else about that. So, as a chemist and a teacher, I had one relationship with my faith, which is about these students and how do I treat them, right? How do I encourage what is in them? How do I see the light in people who might not be able to see it in themselves sometimes? So that was one place where my version of faith is walked out in my job. And then when I became a department chair, I had to see the light in some interesting faculty colleagues sometimes. And you still have to look for it. And it becomes more challenging because they're not 18 to 22, where you just give them the benefit of the doubt. But then you still look for it. And I remember at that point, one of my mentors told me when I was thinking about this position, he said, Val, if you don't realize that there's a pastoral element to leadership, you're in trouble. And I said, I understood what that meant because I had done that with faculty, and now I do that with, 650 faculty across, all these departments and divisions. And when they walk in my door, my first thought is, what do you need? And I'm listening, and I'm listening, and I'm listening, and then there it is. And you have to be really cognizant of that because the power structure changes. And so for me, as the power structure has appeared to push us up, you actually have to turn it upside down personally and realize that now I'm in service to more people, not I'm over more people. And that's a different approach, but that's my personal, my own faith growth or whatever that this is for me is about understanding how that just, changes. The more leadership approaches change.
That's so true. As I've grown as a leader, it's turned much more into listening and understanding fairness in a very different way, where when I was younger, I thought I knew, I could tell what was fair or not in a short conversation. Now I'm much more apt to really listen, and you actually learn. It's lifelong learning as a leader, I think. And so there's no ending that curve of growing as a leader, I don't think.
Yeah, I think to go back to my comment about the importance of speaking truth to power, when you move into these roles, you have to recognize your power. Right. And all of a sudden things are flipped, and as you interact with people, are you being the person who is extinguishing a light in some way or failing to see that light, failing to serve people in ways that will help them improve their lives, and so it does take on a different perspective. You take on a different perspective over time.
Yeah, I think for me, particularly in the role here, a lot of what I do is speaking, so it's a vocation of the word or words, and it's thinking through, well, maybe it's not always what I'm saying, but people might be paying attention, regardless of faith traditions, on what am I doing? So for me, it's been thinking about what might be thought of as a habitus. How am I wearing my belief system or my faith? How does my life say the amen to the proclamation of my lips? And in a particular setting like this, Duke University, which is not a Christian university, playing off of the question from earlier, it becomes, I think, even more important as I think about being a part of a divinity school and being the head here at the University Chapel and in and out of different settings. That what kind of habitus am I wearing and embodying? So that it's like an ongoing internal conversation.
So I think this is a good last question because it's a big one, so we can say some things, but this one's it's a big one. Are Duke's values of what makes a whole human being a subject of knowledge? That is, are these values the kind of thing that we can apply research to? Do we consider the evidence of conflict or different viewpoints on such values as an indication that we should pursue more truth or less truth in these areas?
Wow. So that's a really tough question. Thank you, whoever asked that, for giving us that one to close on. I think the simple answer to the question is yes, that certainly that's fertile territory for research because and many people study these questions about are there absolute truths, are there values that every single human being should adhere to? Because what we know is that there are many value systems that exist that actually are in conflict with one another. And so the whole study of values is extraordinarily important to understand when values provide an opportunity to bring people together and when those values actually lead to conflict for the best of reasons on both sides, but they start from a premise which is in fundamental opposition. And so that because of the potential for these wildly different outcomes, absolutely it deserves to be a topic of study in a great university.
I mean, I would just add that I think having conflict or tension actually keeps the seeking or keeps the conversation going. Without that, the conversations may stop. And so in many ways, it can be helpful or healthy to have the conflicts.
But as everybody knows, there are some major universities that have really been challenged by this issue. How comfortable are universities really allowing that debate and conflict to occur and play out on campuses? And we've seen it in the last year, particularly around speakers that may espouse a very different set of ethics than what we think we hold true. And it's been interesting. It hasn't been all that easy. We can say, yes, we think conflict is part of the process and we should allow open debate, but it's really been challenged. I think Duke has managed to navigate, but many great institutions have really struggled with this year. So in theory, yes. In practice, we see a lot of instances where you get really tripped up.
What I find, which is fascinating but human, is that I'll just say people generally, not necessarily faculty, students, or staff, but just in my world, people generally say, yes, we want to be open-minded, we want free speech, and what that means is until you say something that I don't want to hear, or that comes really close to the line of crossing over maybe, some value, right, that they hold to be, you can't challenge it. And so it's interesting to see how flexible, how open we really are when it's our thing. I always tell people, if you say you want to change the color of this particular wall, I don't care. It's not my thing, I don't care. but when you pick my thing, then I care. And so it's fascinating to navigate because we have this diverse group of people at this university where we don't actually choose sides ever on any issue, but we do have some value. And so it's a very interesting thing to navigate. And I think we're doing it pretty well here, but it's a challenge when, for me, I'll go out on the road and alums will say, I wish Duke would have said they were against this or for that. We don't actually do that. That's not what we do. But they want it to be what we do. And, then there's the question of when are we supposed to speak truth to power and around what issues? It's complicated.
And if you speak all the time, then it less.
Then nobody can hear you
ability
about
to speak.
anything, right? Yes.
So I think with that, we could thank our panelists for a
You.
very good conversation.